We are going live to the UN headquarters. Day one of the general debate of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly is currently underway. Let's listen.
Please, could you take your seats?
Let me begin with two words. We have not been
Well, we're going to try to listen to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as we recover the signal to listening to his opening remarks, where he's going to present the report of the work of this year of the United Nations in its different fields and different agencies. So today, as we were announcing, is the first day of the general debate that is going to take place from Tuesday all the way until Saturday. And of course, we're going to continue to follow up as this comes in the context of a call for the recognition of Palestine and to bring an end to the current challenges to advance peace. Let's continue listening to the Secretary General.
Over conflict. And that choice gave birth to the United Nations, not as a dream for perfection, but as a practical strategy for the survival of humanity. Many of our founders had seen firsthand the hell of the death camps and the terror of war. They knew that true leadership meant creating a system to prevent a replay of those horrors, a firewall against the flames of conflict and World War III, a forum for sovereign states to pursue dialogue and cooperation, and a concrete affirmation of an essential human truth: we are all in this together. And this General Assembly Hall is the heartbeat of that truth. It is why for decades world leaders have come to this one-of-a-kind podium. It is why you are here today. Because at its best, the United Nations is more than a meeting place. It's a moral compass, a force for peace and peacekeeping, a guardian of international law, a catalyst for sustainable development, a lifeline for people in crisis, a lighthouse for human rights, and a center that transforms your decisions, the decisions of member states, into action. 80 years on, we confront again the question our founders faced, only more urgent, more intertwined, more unforgiving. What kind of world do we choose to build together? Excellencies, we have our work cut out for us, as our ability to carry out that work is being cut from us. We have entered in an age of reckless disruption and relentless human suffering. Look around. The principles of the United Nations that you have established are under siege. Listen. The pillars of peace and progress are buckling under the weight of impunity, inequality, and indifference. Sovereign nations invaded. Hunger weaponized. Truth silence. Rising smoke from bombed-out cities, rising anger in fractured societies, rising seas swallowing coastlines. Each one a warning, each one a question: what kind of world will we choose? A world of raw power or a world of laws? A world that is a scramble for self-interest or a world where nations come together? A world where might makes right, or a world of rights for all? Excellencies, our world is becoming increasingly multipolar, and this is positive, reflecting a more diverse, dynamic global landscape. But multipolarity without effective multilateral institutions can court chaos, as Europe has learned the hard way, resulting in World War I. It was multipolar, but there was no multilateral institutions. So let's be clear. International cooperation is not naivete. It is hard-headed pragmatism. In a world where there's leap borders, isolation is an illusion. No country can stop a pandemic alone. No army can halt rising temperatures. No algorithm can rebuild trust once it is broken. These are global stress tests of our system, our solidarity, and our resolve. I'm convinced we can pass these tests, and we must. Because people everywhere are demanding something better, and we owe them a system worthy of their trust and a future worthy of their dreams. And so we must make the choice, an active choice, to reaffirm the imperative of international law, to reassert the centrality of multilateralism, to reinforce justice and human rights, and to recommit to the principles that gave rise to our organization, and to the promise contained in its first words, we the peoples. Excellencies, the choices we face are not part of an ideological debate. They are a matter of life and death for millions. As I scan the global landscape, we must make 5 critical choices. First, we must choose peace rooted in international law. Peace is our first obligation. Yet today, wars rage with a barbarity we vowed never to allow. Too often, the Charter is brandished when convenient and trampled when not. But the Charter is not optional. It is our foundation. And when the foundation cracks, everything built upon fractures. Around the world, we see countries acting as if the rules don't apply to them. We see humans treated as less than human, and we must call it out. Impunity is the mother of chaos, and it has spawned some of the most atrocious conflicts of our times. In Sudan, civilians are being slaughtered, starved, and silenced. Women and girls face unspeakable violence. There is no military solution. I urge all parties, including those in this hall, end the external support that is fueling this bloodshed. Push to protect civilians, because the Sudanese people deserve peace, dignity, and hope. In Ukraine, relentless violence continues to kill civilians, destroy civilian infrastructure, and threaten global peace and security. I commend recent diplomatic efforts by the United States and others. We must work for a full ceasefire and a just, lasting peace in accordance with the Charter, UN resolutions, and international law. In Gaza, the horrors are approaching a third monstrous year. They are the result of decisions that defy basic humanity. The scale of death and destruction are beyond any other conflict in my years as Secretary General. The International Court of Justice has issued legally binding provisional measures in the case named Application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. Since then, a famine has been declared and the killing has intensified. The measures stipulated by the ICJ must be implemented fully and immediately. Nothing can justify the horrific Hamas terror attacks of October 7 and the taking of hostages, those of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people and the systematic destruction of Gaza. We know what is needed. Permanent ceasefire now. All the hostages released now. Full humanitarian access now. And we must not relent in the only viable answer to sustainable Middle East peace, a two-state solution as so eloquently reaffirmed yesterday. We must urgently reverse dangerous trends on the ground. Relentless settler expansion and violence, and the looming threat of annexation must stop. Everywhere, from Haiti to Yemen, to Myanmar and the Sahel and beyond, we must choose peace anchored in international law. The past year has brought glimmers of hope, including the ceasefire between Cambodia and Thailand, and the agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia brokered by the United States. But far too many crises continue unchecked. Impunity prevails, lawlessness is a contagion, it invites mayhem, accelerates terror, and risks a nuclear free-for-all. When accountability shrinks, graveyards grow. When UN staff and facilities are attacked, violating legal obligations, so too is the core of our ability to serve and deliver. The Security Council must live up to its responsibilities. It must be more representative, more transparent, and more effective. And beyond crisis response, we must tackle the injustices that ignite conflict: exclusion, inequality, impunity, and corruption. The surest way to silence the guns is to raise the volume for justice. Real security is born of fairness and opportunity for all.
Excellencies, this leads me to my second point. We must choose human dignity and human rights. Human rights are not an ornament of peace, they're its bedrock. Human rights, economic, social, cultural, political, and civil, are universal, indivisible, and interdependent. Choosing rights means more than words. It means choosing justice over silence. It means protecting freedom and civic space, advancing equality for women and girls, confronting racism and discrimination in all its forms, protecting human rights defenders, journalists, and freedom of speech, and upholding the rights of refugees and migrants so that mobility is safe and in accordance with international law. Human rights are a daily battle, online and offline. They require political will. But dignity is not only about the protection of rights. It is about rights fulfilled through inclusive and resilient development. Rights that put an end to poverty and hunger. Rights that open doors to education, health, and opportunity. The Sustainable Development Goals are our shared roadmap for achieving these rights. But in order to make progress down this road, we need fuel. And that fuel is finance. We've seen what development done right can deliver. In the past decade, millions more have gained access to electricity, clean cooking solutions, and to the internet. Child marriage is in retreat. Women's representation is growing, but cuts to aid are wreaking havoc. They are a death sentence for many. For so many more, a stolen future. This is the great paradox of our time. We have the solutions, but we are siphoning off the fuel that would make it possible to make progress. To choose dignity, we must choose financial justice and solidarity. We need to reform the international financial architecture so that it drives development for all. With bigger and bolder multilateral development banks, lending more, and mobilizing more private capital for developing countries, with faster and fairer debt relief mechanisms, helping every country in crisis, including middle-income countries. Protecting natural resources by tackling illicit financial flows and abusive tax practices that rob societies of their future. And global financial institutions that represent today's world, with far greater participation of developing countries. in terms of their composition and their decision making. So let us choose a global economy that works for everyone, men and women. Let us choose human rights and dignity. And let us equip ourselves with the means to ensure a transition for people and the planet. Excellencies, this brings me to the third choice. We must choose climate justice. The climate crisis is accelerating, but so are the solutions. The clean energy future is no longer a distant promise. It's already here. No government, industry, or special interest can stop it. But some are trying, hurting economies, locking in higher prices, and squandering a historic opportunity.
Fossil fuels are a losing bet. Last year, almost all new power capacity came from renewables, and the investment is surging. Renewables are the cheapest and fastest source of new power. They create jobs, drive growth, shield economies from volatile oil and gas markets, connect the unconnected, and can free us from the tyranny of fossil fuels. But not at today's pace. Clean energy investment remains uneven. 21st century grids and storage are not rolling out fast enough. And public subsidies, taking from taxpayer money, still flow to fossil fuels over clean energy by a factor of 9 to 1. Meanwhile, emissions, temperatures, and disasters keep rising. And those least responsible suffer the most. Science says limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by the end of this century is still possible, but the window is closing. The International Court of Justice has affirmed the legal obligation of states. We must step up action and ambition, especially through strengthened national climate plans. Tomorrow, I will welcome leaders to announce new targets. The G20, the biggest emitters, must lead, guided by common but differentiated responsibilities. But all countries must step up and do more as we head to the UN Climate Conference in Brazil. By accelerating action in energy, forests, methane, and industrial decarbonization. By defining a credible roadmap to mobilize $1.3 trillion annually in climate finance by 2035 for developing countries. By supporting just transitions, by doubling finance for adaptation to at least $40 billion this year, and rapidly deploying proven tools to unlock billions more in concessional finance. And by capitalizing the Loss and Damage Fund with significant contributions. All of these requires government, international financial institutions, philanthropies, civil society, and the private sector to work together, to provide fiscal space to developing countries and unlock new innovative sources of finance at scale, including solidarity levies on high-emitting sectors and debt swaps. We have the solutions and tools, but we must choose climate justice and climate action. First, we must choose to put technology at the service of humanity. Artificial intelligence is rewriting human existence in real time, transforming how we learn, work, communicate, and what we can trust. And the question is not how to stop it, but how to steer it for the greater good. Technology must be our servant, not our master. It must promote human rights, human dignity, and human agency. Yet today, AI's advancement in outpacing regulation and responsibility and is concentrated in a few hands. And the risks are expanding to new frontiers, from biotech to autonomous weapons. We are witnessing the rise of tools for mass surveillance, mass social control, mass disruption, and even mass destruction. tools that can drain energy, strain ecosystems, and intensify the race for critical minerals, potentially stoking instability and conflict. Yet, these technologies remain largely ungoverned. We need universal guardrails and common standards across platforms. No company should be above the law. No machines should decide who lives or dies. No system should be deployed without transparency, safety, and accountability. Last month, this Assembly took a historic step, establishing an independent international scientific panel on AI and an annual global dialogue on AI governance. Two new pillars of a shared architecture, connecting science with policy to bring clarity and foresight, enabling innovation to flourish while advancing our values and our rights, and ensuring governments, companies, and civil society can help shape common norms. We must build on these mechanisms and close the capacity gap. All countries must be able to design and develop AI, not just to consume it. I have proposed voluntary financing options to build AI computing power, data, and skills in developing nations. No country should be locked out of the digital future or locked into systems it cannot shape or trust. And governments must lead with vision, and companies must act. And we, the international community, must ensure that technology lifts up humanity. So let us choose cooperation over fragmentation, ethics over expediency, and transparency over opacity. Technology will not wait for us, but we can still choose what it serves. So let us choose wisely. Fifth and finally, to meet all these goals, we must choose to strengthen the United Nations for the 21st century. The forces shaking our world are also testing the foundations of the United Nations system. We are being hit by rising geopolitical tensions and divisions, chronic uncertainty, and mounting financial strain. But those who depend on the United Nations must not be made to bear the cost, especially now, when for every dollar invested to support our core work to build peace, the world spends $750 on weapons of war. This is not only unsustainable, it is indefensible. In this moment of crisis, the United Nations has never been more essential. The world needs our unique legitimacy, our convening power, our vision to unite nations, to bridge divides and confront the challenges before us. The Pact for the Future has shown your determination to build a United Nations that is stronger, more inclusive, and more effective. That is the logic and the urgency of our UN80 initiative. We are moving swiftly and decisively. I put forward concrete proposals, a revised budget for 2026 that strengthens accountability, improves delivery, and cuts costs. Practical reforms to implement mandates more effectively and efficiently with greater impact. And ideas to spark a paradigm shift in the structure of the UN and how its parts work together. Most of these decisions rest with you, the Member States, and we will move forward in full respect of the established procedures. Together, let us choose to invest in a United Nations that adapts, innovates, and is empowered to deliver for people everywhere. Excellencies, my overriding message comes down to this. Now is the time to choose. It's not enough to know what the right choices are. I urge you to make them. I grew up in a world where choices were few. I was raised in the darkness of dictatorship, where fear silenced voices and hope was nearly crushed. Yet, even the bleakest hours, especially then, I discovered a truth that has never left me. Power does not reside in the hands of those who dominate or divide. Real power resides from people, from our shared resolve to uphold dignity, to defend equality, to believe fiercely in our common humanity and the potential of every human being. I learned early to persevere, to speak out, to refuse to surrender, no matter the challenge, no matter the obstacle, no matter the hour. We must and we will overcome. Because in a world of many choices, there is one choice we must never make, the choice to give up. We must never give up. That is my promise to you, for peace, for dignity, for justice, for humanity, for the world we know is possible when we work as one. I will never, ever give up. Thank you.
The statements of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as he was addressing the opening of this first day of debate. The Secretary General went over the work that has been done in the past times by the UN systems, and he upheld the UN founding principles and to better reinforce right now in these moments that so many challenges are coming up in the 21st century. That's why he called to reinforce the UN system and to adapt the Security Council to better face the current challenges. Let's now listen to the President of the General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock.
Human life. This anniversary of the United Nations should have been a moment of celebration. But this is not an ordinary year. Just look at the state of our world, as the Secretary General described. Thousands of orphans in Gaza are wandering around the rubble, eating sand, drinking contaminated water. 90-year-old women in Ukraine are hiding from drones, trapped in their homes instead of living their final years in peace. Children in Haiti, too afraid to walk to school, afraid they might be gunned down by gangs like their friends. And for every conflict and tragedy that seizes the headlines, there are so many more that are forgotten, lost to the news cycle. Like women in Democratic Republic of the Congo, shielding their daughters from armed groups, fearful they might be raped. And Rohingya children, spending their whole childhood in tattered tents, unable to remember what their home looks like. Faced with these realities, now is not the time to celebrate, but to ask ourselves, where is the United Nations? Distinguished heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, people out there in the world watching us. Clearly, we have to do better. But what we should not let cynics allow to weaponize these failures, to argue that our institution is a waste of money, outdated, irrelevant. When the principles of the Charter are ignored, is it the UN that has failed? When tanks rolled into Ukraine, was it because Article 2 of the Charter is not clear enough about sovereignty and territorial integrity? When civilians, children, are killed in Gaza, is it humanitarian law at fault for failing to protect them? It's not the Charter which fails. It's not the UN as an institution which fails. The Charter, our Charter, is only as strong as member states' willingness to uphold it, and their willingness to hold to account those who violate it. Excellencies, yes, our world is in pain. Yes, we have failures. But imagine how much worse would it be without the United Nations? Would a single person be better off without it? Without UNICEF, 26 million children would not have received an education. Without the World Food Programme, nearly 125 million people would have lacked life-saving food assistance. Without the World Health Organization, over 1 billion vaccines would not have been supplied. Sometimes we could have done more, but we cannot let this dishearten us. If we stop doing the right thing, evil would prevail. This 80th session is not about big celebrations. It's about finding the resolve not to give up, the resolve to be better together, just as our predecessors did 8 decades ago. This institution was born in a world on fire and desperate for reprieve. 750 million, nearly a third of humanity back then, still under colonial rule. 2 world wars in a generation, 70 million dead. The horrors of the Holocaust revealed to our collective shame. This was a generation that knew almost nothing but suffering and despair. The signing of the Charter in 1945 gave hope to millions, gave us a North Star that guided our path from the ashes of war, helped guide nations from colonial rule into independent states, helped end apartheid. Across the decades, the United Nations has been a compass pointing toward peace, humanity, and justice. We have not always succeeded, but the story of this institution is not a story of easy victories. It's a story of falling and rising, of pulling ourselves and each other back up and trying harder. We gather here for the 80th time, not for empty celebration, not out of ritual, not to hear our own voices. We gather to prove that this institution matters, and that through this institution, every nation represented here, no matter how big or small, can summon again the strength and unity first shown in San Francisco 80 years ago. The courage and resolve of world leaders who, even while some called them back then naive, believed they could build a better world from the wreckage of the old. They showed then what true leadership is. It's not about imposing your will or putting others down. True leadership is about lifting others up, not out of altruism, but for our mutual benefit, and even out of our self-interest. Because as our founders and every architect of peace since then has understood, helping others is what makes ultimately our own countries stronger. Could any state have faced the global pandemic alone? The virus did not have any passport. We were only able to solve it at the end with the support of the World Health Organization. The climate crisis does not stop at borders. CO2 emissions anywhere affect people everywhere. Even the wealthiest cities in the world cannot shield themselves from wildfires. And imagine coming here by plane. How safe would you feel to step into the next airplane if there were no International Civil Aviation Organization anymore, which is responsible for setting safety regulations for 5 billion passengers each year? How comfortable would you be with your children using the internet while AI is uncontrolled and unchecked, as the lines between what is real and fake start to blur? In this globalized, digitalized world, we work together or we suffer alone. Excellencies, the theme of this milestone session and the high-level week is therefore Better Together. 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. Will living up to that be easy? No. But this hall was not built for easy times. It was built to come together to confront the hardest topics. This session is a session where the high-level week is about resolving differences. We showed some of it yesterday already. But even the House of Dialogue and Diplomacy needs a renovation. That is why the UN80 initiative and the wider reform process are not luxuries, but necessities. We are literally now at a crossroads, a make it or break it moment, politically, financially. Therefore, we have to deliver a United Nations that is agile, cost-effective, and fit for purpose. Member States have to give the Secretary General and this process their full support, because reform cannot stop in New York. It must carry through to every capital. That includes delivering the Pact for the Future and accelerating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, this is not about charity. It's about addressing the core purposes of this institution, about strengthening our foundations across all three pillars: peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. They are inseparable. Leaving hundreds of millions trapped in extreme poverty, vulnerable to crisis, and denied their human rights is not only a moral failure, it's a recipe for global unrest, terrorism, the tragic waste of humanity's greatest resource, its people. Put it simply, without the SDGs, there cannot be lasting peace. Excellencies, our future as an institution will also be shaped by the selection of the next Secretary General. And here we must pause and reflect. In nearly 80 years, this organization has never chosen a woman for that role. One might wonder how out of 4 billion potential candidates, there could not be found a single one. Of course, the choice rests with member states. But those of you having been there yesterday celebrating Beijing, one strong female leader after the other from all our continents. Like 80 years ago, we are standing at a crossroads. And it's up to us, to every single member state, to live up to the same leadership as your predecessors did. To act when action is needed. To uphold the principles of our Charter. To be better together. To show the people around the world that this United Nation is there. Today, tomorrow, and for the next 8 decades. Because, after all, it's the life insurance for every country. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind Member States that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into the other official languages may be provided properly. I would also like to draw your attention to the decision taken by the Assembly at previous sessions, namely that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the Assembly Hall after speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. After delivering their statements from the rostrum, speakers are invited to exit the hall through room JA200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the Assembly agrees to proceed in this manner? It's so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of Member States that during the general debate, official photographers are in the room and will take official photographs of all speakers by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. By this, the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President of the General Assembly, Analina Berbuki, Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, dear heads of state and government, and representatives of the member states gathered here. This should be a time to celebrate the United Nations. Created at the end of the war, the UN symbolizes the highest expression of the aspiration for peace and prosperity. Today, however, the ideals that inspired its founders in San Francisco are under threat as never before in their history. Multilateralism is at a new crossroads. The organization's authority is in check. We are witnessing the consolidation of an international order marked by repeated concessions to power play. Attacks on sovereignty, arbitrary sanctions, and unilateral interventions are becoming the rule. There is a clear parallel between the multilateralism crisis and the weakening of democracy. Authoritarianism is strengthened when we fail to act in the face of arbitrary acts, when the international society falters in defending peace, sovereignty, and the rule of law. The consequences are tragic. Throughout the world, anti-democratic forces are trying to subjugate institutions and stifle freedoms. They worship violence, praise ignorance, act as physical and digital militias, and restrict the press. Even under an unprecedented attack, Brazil chose to resist and defend its democracy, regained 40 years ago by its people after 2 decades of dictatorial governments. There is no justification for unilateral and arbitrary measures against our institutions and our economy. The aggression against the independence of the judiciary branch of power is unacceptable. This interference in domestic affairs is aided by a subservient far right who is nostalgic of past hegemonies. False patriots plan and publicly promote actions against Brazil. Peace cannot be achieved with impunity. A few days ago, and for the first time in 525 years of our history, a former head of state was convicted of attacking the democratic rule of law. He was investigated, indicted, trialed, and held accountable for his actions in a meticulous process. He has the right to defend himself was secured, a prerogative that dictatorships deny to their victims. Before the eyes of the world, Brazil sent a message to all aspiring autocrats and those who support them. Our democracy, our sovereignty are non-negotiable. We will continue as an independent nation and as a people free from any type of guardianship. Sound democracies go beyond the electoral ritual. Its strength presupposes the reduction of inequalities, the guarantee of the most basic rights: food, safety, work, housing, education, and health. Democracy fails when women earn less than men or die at the hands of partners and family members. It loses when it closes its doors and blames migrants for the world's ills. Poverty is as much an enemy of democracy as extremism. Therefore, we were proud to receive confirmation from FAO that Brazil has once again left the hunger map in this year, 2025. But in the world, there are still 670 million hungry people, and about 2.3 billion face food insecurity. The only war of which everyone can emerge victorious is the one we wage against hunger and poverty. This is the goal of the global alliance we launched at the G20 and which has the support of 103 countries. The international community needs to revise its priorities, reduce arms spending, and increase development aid. Relieve the service of the foreign debt of the poorest countries, above all African nations, and set minimum global tax standards so that the super rich pay more taxes than workers. Democracy is also measured by the ability to protect families and the childhood. Digital platforms offer possibilities for us to come together in ways we never imagined. But they have been used for sowing intolerance, misogyny, xenophobia, and misinformation. The internet cannot be a land of lawlessness. It's up to governments to protect the most vulnerable. Regulating does not mean restraining freedom of expression. It's about ensuring that what is already illegal in the real world is treated the way in the virtual environment. Attacks on regulation serve to cover up hidden interests and provide shelter for crimes such as fraud, human trafficking, pedophilia, and attacks against democracy. The Brazilian parliament was right to rush to address this issue. Last week, I proudly enacted one of the world's most advanced laws for the protection of children and adolescents in the digital environment. Also, we sent draft bills to the National Congress to foster competition in digital markets and to encourage the installation of sustainable data centers. To mitigate the risks of artificial intelligence, we are committed to building multilateral governance in line with the Global Digital Compact that was approved in this plenary last year. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we are experiencing a time of growing polarization and instability. Maintaining the region as a zone of peace is and was our priority. We are a continent free of weapons of mass destruction, without ethnic or religious conflicts. The comparison between crime and terrorism is worrying. The most effective way to combat drug trafficking is to cooperate to suppress money laundering and limit arms trade. Using lethal force in situations that do not constitute armed conflict is tantamount to executing people without trial. Other parts of the planet have already witnessed interventions that cause greater damage than intended, with serious humanitarian consequences. The path to dialogue must not be closed in Venezuela. Haiti has the right to a violence-free future, and it is unacceptable that Cuba be listed as a country that sponsors terrorism. In the conflict in Ukraine, we all already know that there will be no military solution. The recent meeting in Alaska raised hopes for a negotiated way out. It's necessary to pave the way for a realistic solution. This implies taking into account the legitimate security concerns of all parties. The African Initiative and the Friends for Peace group created by China and Brazil can help promote dialogue and a diplomatic solution. No situation is more emblematic of the disproportionate and illegal use of force than the one occurring in Palestine. The terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas are indefensible from any angle, but nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies the ongoing genocide in Gaza. There, under tons of rubble, are buried tens of thousands of innocent women and children. There, we can see that international humanitarian law and the myth of ethical exceptionalism of the West are also being buried there. This massacre would not have happened without the complicity of those who could have prevented it. In Gaza, hunger is used as a weapon of war, and the forced displacement of populations goes on unpunished. I express my admirations to the Jews who, inside and outside Israel, oppose this collective punishment. The Palestinian people are at risk of disappearing. They will only survive with an independent state integrated to the international community. This is the solution defended by more than 150 UN members, reaffirmed yesterday here in this very plenary, but barred by a single veto. It is regrettable that President Mahmoud Abbas was prevented by the host country of occupying the Palestinian bench at this historical moment. The spread of this conflict to Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Qatar is fueling an unprecedented arms build-up. Madam President, bombs and nuclear weapons will not protect us from the climate crisis. The year of 24 was the warmest already registered. COP30 in the city of Belém, Brazil, will the cope of truth. It will be the time for world leaders to prove the seriousness of their commitment to the planet. Without a complete picture of the NDC's nationally determined contributions, we were walking blindfolded towards the abyss. Brazil has committed to reducing its emissions by 59 and 67%, covering all greenhouse gases and all sectors of the economy. Developing nations face climate change while grappling with other challenges. Meanwhile, rich countries enjoy a standard of living reached at the expense of 200 years of greenhouse gas emissions, demanding greater ambition and greater access to resources and technology. It's not a matter of charity, but of justice. The race for critical minerals essential for energy transition cannot reproduce the predatory and asymmetrical logic that has characterized recent centuries. In Belém City, the world will learn about the reality of the Amazon. Brazil has already reduced deforestation by half in the region in the last 2 years. Eradicating it requires ensuring decent living conditions for its millions of inhabitants. Promoting sustainable development is the objective of the Tropical Forest Forever facility, which Brazil intends to launch to compensate countries that keep their forests standing. But the time has come to move from the negotiation phase to the implementation stage. The world owes a lot to the regime created by the Climate Convention. Climate change needs to be brought to the heart of the UN so that it gets the attention it deserves. A council linked to the General Assembly with the power and legitimacy to monitor commitments provide coherence to climate action. This is a fundamental step towards a broader reform of the organization, which would also include an expanded Security Council in the 2 member categories. Few areas have worsened as much as the multilateral trading system. Unilateral measures have rendered fundamental principles, such as the most favored nations clauses, meaningless. They have disrupted value chains and threw the global economy into a pernicious spiral of high prices and stagnation. It is urgent to refound the WTO based on modern and flexible foundations. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year, the world lost 2 exceptional public figures. Former Uruguayan President Pepe Mujica and our dear Pope Francis, both embodied the best humanist values like no other. Their lives were intertwined with the 8 decades of the UN's existence. If they were still among us, they would use this platform to remember that authoritarianism, environmental degradation, and inequality are not relentless, that the only ones defeated are those who stand idly by, resignate, and that we can defeat the false prophets and oligarchs who exploit fear and monetize hate, and that tomorrow is made of daily choices, and it takes courage to act to transform it. In the future that Brazil envisions, there is no room for the reenactment of ideological rivalries or spheres of influence. Confrontation is not inevitable. We need leaders with clear visions who understand that the international order is not a zero-sum game. The 21st century will be increasingly multipolar. For it to remain peaceful, it cannot fall to multilateral. Brazil is giving increasing importance to the European Union, the African Union, ASEAN, CELAC, BRICS, and the G20. The voice of the global South must be heard. The UN has today almost 4 times more members than the 51 who were at its foundation. Our historic mission is to make it once again a barrier of hope and a promoter of equality, peace, sustainable development, diversity, and tolerance. May God bless us all. And thank you very much.
Well, we listen to the statements of the Brazilian President Lula Silva at this first day of the General Debate of the United Nations General Assembly in its 80th session, where he made reference to different elements, especially the fact to condemn the genocide in Gaza and the actions taken, and also to denounce the accomplices of the Israeli regime that have made this genocide come to fruition. He was also referring that it is unacceptable that Cuba is in a list of countries that sponsor terrorism, and also denounced the use of military missiles, of military weapons to fight drug trafficking, which he said that this is not the way that drug trafficking is truly fought, and that the path of dialogue cannot be closed in Venezuela. He was also referring to the situation in Haiti, the need for Haiti to that they have the right to live in peace without violence running rampant, and to the necessary action that must be taken to ensure that this happens, and also to put climate change in the center of the UN, as it is something necessary for the continued existence of humanity as a species in the world, and also referred to the rampant the new trend that he described that is happening right now in the world of authoritarianism and of certain groups that are anti-democratic and seek to subjugate the peoples of the world. He was making reference to the unprecedented attacks on sovereignty against the Brazilian nation following the Supreme Court's ruling on the Jair Bolsonaro coup case, with the attacks that were made against the sovereignty of the nation coming following that ruling. Those are the statements in rough summary of the Brazilian president. We'll have more. Also, we heard the statements of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the President of the Assembly. And we're going to continue to in New York, in the United Nations headquarters, to continue following up everything that is happening in this paramount high-level week. Stay tuned with teleSUR English.